Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning to another episode of The Spiritual Scientist. I'm Victor. Hey, thanks for checking me out. Om Namaste. Just thought I'd talk a little bit about today about crystals. I had someone else ask me about crystals today, and someone asked me before to do a video about crystals, so I thought as well. And again, I don't mean to just talk, hey, I'm the shit, but I know a lot about all these kind of spiritual things. And then people who I told some of this to were like, oh, where'd you read that? And I'm like, I don't need to read these things anymore. Like, these are my original thoughts. So this is all my original information. I'm not regurgitating like everybody else all these other things. So I'm an INFJ. I'm all these different things spiritually. So I just know, you know. So anyway, it gets to be annoying when people are like, "Oh, where'd you read that?" I'm like, "Where's your source?" I'm like, my source is source. I don't need to. Where's your footnotes? I'm like, I'm the footnote. It's me. So anyway, about crystals. I've been into spirituality a long time, and original OG gangsta in the house, right? So the crack myself up. So crystals themselves, right? Crystals take on this. They vibrate. So they vibrate at a certain vibrational level. For instance, now crystals are known to go and vibrate. Quartz crystals at, I believe it's 780,000 times per, like, a pictosecond is how much, how crystals can vibrate. So they vibrate, very fast. So when you have these, the way, and I'll explain a little bit so you understand the science behind it. Like, for instance, an RC car, when you have a remote and you want to make an RC car go, there's a crystal in your handheld device, and there's a crystal, piezoelectric crystal, in the car itself. So the crystal that you have is they take this real thin wafer of quartz, and what they do is they have this, and they take the resonance. It takes a computer chip, they put it on there, and it measures the piezoelectrical effect that comes off the crystal. And what it does is they vibrate the crystal, and it sends out a wave, and that wave is information, is hits the other crystal, and that's how radios work. And it actually translates it into the movement in the car. So a lot of our modern day things in the world work by crystals vibrating, although most people don't know this. They don't know the science behind an actual radio. Listen to AM or an FM, there's a little crystal in there, it's vibrating, right? Kind of cool. So these crystals now vibrate. So they vibrate in a higher spectrum. So what you're doing is you have a crystal that vibrates a certain manner, and it gives off a certain vibrational, frequency. Now we're in a certain vibrational frequency, and there's other higher and lower dimensional frequencies that we are not perceiving. So the crystal itself is part of it is embedded in our realm, our 3D realm, and it resonates in these higher frequencies. Now, I was specifically asked today by somebody about Moldavite. I said, yeah, Moldavite has a high vibrational frequency, a spiritual frequency for a lot of people. And they said, well, that's just, they said that's just because that's it's psychosomatic, so people think that it has that, and that's why it does that. I said, no, not really. It really does do something. And he said, well, why would that just be? I said, let me explain it a little more. So when I got into something that God showed me, and I got into the flower of life, And what I was looking for is patterns, in nature, Fibonacci sequences and everything else, and it unlocked a lot of information for me. And when I found out that phenokite, phenokite is really a high vibrational crystal. Any of these kites, Moldavite, tite, tektite, they seem to have high vibrational frequencies. So I was like, why is it has such a why is it we're all saying it? So what I did was I looked at the chemical bonds of it, and through electron microscope, I discovered, first guy, that for instance, these certain crystals that vibrate for spiritual crystal light workers, when you take those same crystals and we look at it, the atomic bonds are structured in a way that emulates the flower of life. So the flower of life is is basically like the building blocks of the entire universe and how everything's set up. So when you look at, for instance, phenokite, when I looked at the base atomic structure of it, I found that it emulates closely the flower of life pattern, and so did other, like Moldavite and other these tektites. They emulate the flower of life pattern. So when we take that, it was a little bit off, and when it's a little bit off and it's a little bit different, that just is what it's doing, in that. So it gets into that more of that, I would say, base, almost informational way that the universe is built upon. It gets into as well the higher frequencies, and I'm well aware of that, giving off that pattern. Now, when you have, let's say, a crystal, and you're taking that crystal, in your hand, I would see people, they would go into a store and they, take that crystal and they hold it, I don't think you're going to get anything in that short instance of you holding your hand. You're not really going to feel anything at that point. So a lot of people don't understand how crystals work, how they are, how they function. You have to match your frequency to that frequency, which takes a matter of, let's say, an hour. So I'm sure I could get feedback from people who are into this, and they would say, "No, you're wrong. I feel things right away." Blah 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 blah. Yeah, right. So you really need to get close to that for a long period of time. It could it happen sooner? Sure, anything can happen. But what I'm saying is that your that crystal itself, you see, it is the like, as they say with string theory. So we see a string theory. In string theory, you have a theory of one, that one particle is here, but yet it is vibrating at a different frequency. Like Nikolai Tesla said that everything's vibration and frequency. So when it's vibrating here, it's vibrating different levels somewhere else. So it's the same thing with the crystal. So the crystal, for instance, what I want to say is, think of it as almost hollow, right? And then the particles, the slight structure of the crystal itself, the slight difference, the wave of, you could think of almost reality, but the wave of reality move forward through it, and that crystal's always vibrating. So it's vibrating at a specific frequency. When the wave of reality moves through it, and wave goes through that specific frequency, then you'll have a harmonic convergence at a higher frequency. Like when you say, when you have a harmonic level, you have a low tone and you have, a high tone. So the crystal is in our matrix, in our reality set, at the low tone, and we are not perceiving the high tone, which is the emulation of the low tone, which is in sympathetic response to that higher vibrational, frequency. And the low, we're on the low end, right? And so that is what I'm trying to explain, is how how frequencies and how crystals work. Now, for instance, people have noticed with, for instance, tourmaline does one thing. They say, oh, it's grounding. And how is that? So people feel certain way, and then over time they say, oh, this crystal seems to do this thing, and then it matches. So then we tell each other and we write these things down, and that's how we come up with this. So oh, it seems to do this, it seems to do that. So it's not anything untoward. How do I say? It's not just fantasy. A lot of people, what this is the spiritual scientist channel. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the spiritual aspect of crystals and I'm actually explaining it in the scientific manner for you to understand, right? So when we have these, for instance, crystals, and let's say you have one crystal, and then people have found out that they could pair it with a different crystal. So you have two crystals, so their different frequencies kind of blend together and cause a third functionality at a higher oscillation. And then we take that information, so that higher oscillation is what we're saying now, as it kind of trickles down to our reality. So oh, it seems to do this, it seems to do that. It works on the same functionality as the crystal that was mentioned before in radios. So it translates that data. Now with crystals in the radio, they'll have two, crystals, and they're matching that frequency wave together. Now on the other spectrum, higher, frequency realms, you're going to get, different responses from different beings attuned at different, for different things, and while you're with that crystal and you're matching your frequency with it, by being with that crystal all the time, your energetic field is within the same field as the crystal. Okay, now your reality is wave is matching that crystal wave. Now when that goes out, now that draws different things, right? So that's what I'm explaining to you. Now crystals themselves might work for different people different ways. So you could have someone who's had all the, for instance, if you know what Reiki is, Reiki attunements, and when they pick up a crystal and they use it, their aura, their energetic being is tuned differently for a different function, you see. So that person in that way, when they have a crystal, that crystal is the same way as two crystals working together give out a third functionality. When you have someone has a different attunement, when they have that crystal, then that gives off a different type of a frequency than somebody, for instance, off the street that hasn't done any spiritual work. They pick up a crystal, and the crystal's just being the crystal. You see what I mean? Does that make sense to you? I hope so. So it doesn't just make you spiritual by having this crystal. A lot of people think that. And a lot of people think that, oh, it doesn't work for me. It takes two to tango, right? So you can't, if you just had that wafer for the radio, but you didn't, that piezoelectric crystal, and you didn't have it plugged into the right spot in the radio itself wouldn't be working, and you couldn't get any information from it. So in the same way, you need someone who is actually a crystal light worker would be the best person, or somebody who's attuned to work with crystals, who's worked with them for a long time. Those people, it would work more readily available with them because they're already have been matching frequencies many times for many types of crystals. They've worked with that. They've had, for instance, attunements. They've done all that work, that leg work. They might have been doing this for years, you know. And then to see, somebody come and walk into, let's say, a crystal store, and they pick up a crystal and they hold it in their hand, and they're, oh, does this do anything? And oh, let me put this one down. I'm like, well, have you done any spiritual work on yourself? Have you done any self work? Have you tried meditation? Maybe that is not a good crystal for you. Maybe it's too high a vibration for you at this present time. And everybody's always about, oh, raise your vibration, raise your vibration. I actually say, do the vibration that's good for you. Maybe, for instance, your vibration's too high. And people go, what do you mean too high? How can you have, a too high a vibration? Well, if you're out of sync with if your vibration in for instance, your being is just tuned too high. Maybe you're always carrying a crystal, and you're just too high a vibrational frequency, then the lower aspects of that you haven't worked on, and you're having a disconnect. So maybe you're having too much anxiety. Maybe you're having too much stress. Maybe it's because you're always holding on to that crystal. You're sleeping with your crystal. You're always working with that crystal, and now you have a disconnect from where you're supposed to be. So for instance, I don't sleep with crystals. I can't. If I have a crystal with me and I go to bed, I won't sleep. It's going to keep my vibration too high. I'm super attuned to them, and I just can't sleep. I'll just stay up. It's like coffee for me. It's very bad. So I'll just stay up and I won't sleep. I'll be up until 3, 4 in the morning and get real upset. So I need to keep any crystals I have past the 6-foot radius when I want to go to sleep. There's been a time where I've gone to bed and it's already 1 in the morning. I'm looking, why can't I sleep? Turn on the night light, and there's a crystal that I left by mistake on my night table. So I have to take it, put it across the room, and I go back to snooze mode in a few minutes once I detune from that vibrational frequency. So that takes time. So you rise up slowly and you rise down. So all these things are, information like I have in here. This is just, like I say, all this stuff I'm giving you short bursts, tip of the iceberg. What I'd like to do is do some real teaching with people, do retreats. I'm trying to put together meditation classes. That's a good way to start, and go from there. But hope you found this information interesting. Like, subscribe, share it with your friends. Let me know what you think in the comments, as always. And if you're interested and like I was saying to someone else today too, I was like, for me, a crystal can be like coffee. Sometimes you don't want a coffee. Sometimes you're vibrating, a different way. So you choose which crystals you want. There was a crystal that I had, for instance, just to tell you real quick, Dambarite, right? So Dambarite. So I took a Dambarite crystal, put it in my pocket, connects to higher aspects, higher angels, higher self, but then it's an information crystal. So I put it in my pocket, and I forgot. And I'm going around all day, but I'm being very patient, but I'm explaining something. Like somebody asked me about, I'll just say coffee again. Somebody asked me about coffee, and I'm like, oh yes, and the coffee beans are really great. And these coffee beans are Sumatra coffee beans. And the way these coffee beans are made is they're taken from, and they're like, wow, you know a lot about coffee beans. And I'm like, and you're really explaining everything in detail. And I'm like, yeah. So then somebody else asked me about something else. And I'm like, yeah, you know, this, I'm just explaining things all day, because what it does is that crystal itself is for, you know, your higher aspect to you know, explain information basically, like it's an information crystal. But here I'm holding it. I'm like, I'm explaining everything to everybody I meet, and I'm like, why? And then the end of the day, I'm like, oh, that was you, you know, and I got put away because I'm just like, you know, it's good to explain things, but I don't want to be an encyclopedia all day long. I have things to do, you know. Why explain, you know, every little thing to everybody all the time, you know? So because that my frequency could work with that frequency, it produces, like I said, a third, you know, third type of frequency, and you have to find the right crystal that works for you. And but the first thing you would do is do, you know, the self work. And the thing about it is, when you get to a certain level spiritually, you don't, you know, you don't need crystals. You don't need these things. It's just like an added bonus. It's just like little things. Like I'm not wearing a crystal. I don't need crystals. I don't need them anymore. In fact, sometimes my vibration's too high. I want to make sure I don't have any crystals around. So, you know, that's the thing. So, anyway, just want to further explain. Like, subscribe, share. Namaste. Peace, peace, peace. Thank you so much. Bye bye.